Memphis, March 9th, 1892, 2:30 in the morning. 75 men in black masks surrounded the county jail. 9 of them went inside. They dragged 3 men from their cells, Thomas Moss, Calvin McDowell, Will Stewart, drove them to a railroad yard 1 mile outside the city, and shot them dead. The white papers had been called in advance to watch. Thomas Moss's last words, "Tell my people to go west. There is no justice here." Nobody was arrested, nobody was charged. The official story was already written. But there was one person in Memphis who didn't believe it, a 29-year-old journalist named Ida B. Wells, and what she found would change American history and cost her everything. Her name was Ida B. Wells, born into slavery in Mississippi, 1862, 6 months before the Emancipation Proclamation. By the time she was 16, both her parents were dead from yellow fever. She raised her 5 younger siblings alone. Then she became a teacher, then a newspaper editor, then the most dangerous journalist in America. She co-owned a paper called the Free Speech. She had already been fired from her teaching job for writing that Memphis's black schools were deliberately underfunded. She had already sued a railroad company for throwing her out of a first-class car, and won. Ida B. Wells was not a woman who accepted the official story. And the official story of what happened to Thomas Moss had more holes in it than anyone wanted to admit. Thomas Moss was not a criminal. He was a postman, a church deacon. Ida was godmother to his daughter. In 1889, Moss and 2 partners opened People's Grocery, a black-owned cooperative in a neighborhood called The Curve. It thrived. Black residents chose it over the white-owned grocery across the street, owned by a man named William Barrett. Barrett's business was dying, and Barrett was furious. In March of 1892, Barrett started making accusations. He claimed the men at People's Grocery were dangerous, a threat. He got enough traction that a group of armed white men went to the store looking for a confrontation. Shots were fired. Several white men were wounded. Moss, McDowell, and Stewart were arrested and jailed. They had done nothing wrong. They had defended their store. 3 days later, the masked mob came. Ida read what the papers wrote about the lynching. She read the justifications. She read the outrage, directed not at the mob, but at the men who had been killed. And something shifted in her. She had spent years accepting, not agreeing with, but accepting the narrative that lynchings, however brutal, were provoked, that the men killed had done something to bring it on themselves. Thomas Moss had opened a grocery store. That was his crime. His store was too successful. His community was too proud, and the system decided he needed to be removed. Ida began to pull files. She started investigating every lynching she could find records of across the American South, case by case. She interviewed witnesses, tracked down families, read every official report and every newspaper account. What she found was a pattern so clear it couldn't be denied. The protection of white women, the reason given publicly, repeatedly, for nearly every lynching, was almost never supported by evidence. In case after case, there was no accusation of assault until after the man was already dead. In many cases, there was no accusation at all. But in almost every case, there was a pattern underneath: Black economic success, Black political power, Black men who had built something that made white men uncomfortable. Lynching was not a crime of passion. It was a management strategy. On May 21, 1892, 2 months after Thomas Moss died in a railroad yard, Ida B. Wells published an editorial in the Free Speech. She said it plainly. The rape narrative was a lie, constructed after the fact to justify murders that had nothing to do with assault and everything to do with economics and power. She named the pattern, she named the system, she put it in print. 4 days later, the Memphis Daily Commercial wrote, "The fact that a black scoundrel is allowed to live and utter such loathsome calumnies is evidence of the wonderful patience of Southern whites, but we have had enough of it." The Evening Scimitar added, "Patience under such circumstances is not a virtue." These were not anonymous threats. These were Memphis newspapers, publishing openly. Ida was in New York when she read them. She never went back. While she was gone, a white mob seized the Free Speech. They destroyed the press. They threatened to kill her if she returned to Memphis. They had burned her newspaper to the ground for telling the truth, and they thought that would stop her. It didn't. Burned out from Memphis, Ida kept writing. The New York Age published her investigation, a 7-column piece titled Exiled, laying out everything she'd found. She distributed 10,000 copies across the country. She traveled to Britain twice. She lectured in front of packed audiences in London, Birmingham, Edinburgh. She forced American lynching onto the international stage and made it impossible for American officials to ignore. She published Southern Horrors, Lynch Law in all its phases. Then a red record, 100 pages of documented lynching statistics, names, dates, locations, causes. She built the evidence into something no one could dismiss. Back in Memphis, 6,000 black residents had followed Thomas Moss's dying words. They left. They took their labor, their money, their business with them. The city felt it. Ida had told them to go, and they went. Nobody was ever charged for what happened in that railroad yard. Not the men who dragged Thomas Moss from his cell, not William Barrett, whose jealousy started it all, not the newspapers that called in the mob and called in the reporters to watch. The Free Speech was burned so completely that not a single copy survives. The only proof it ever existed comes from articles reprinted in other papers. They tried to erase her, too. But Ida B. Wells spent the next 40 decades building something they couldn't burn. She helped found the NAACP. She fought for federal anti-lynching legislation. She documented over 1,000 cases. She created the evidentiary record that would force the country to look at what it had done. She didn't get to see it finished. She died in 1931, still fighting. But the case she opened in Memphis in 1892, she made sure it could never be closed.